My name is Jennifer, and 40% of families play favorites. I learned this when my father used my dying mother's hospice fund to pay for my brother's Vegas weekend. He downgraded her private suite to a shared room in her final days to free up the cash. What he never knew was that I had become the majority investor in that very hospice 2 years earlier. This is about more than money, it's about who we value in a family's most desperate hour. My mother was in that shared room, dying of stage 4 pancreatic cancer, while my brother posted poolside photos from the strip, and I was the one person who could stop it all with a single signature. But would I use that power for revenge or for the peace my mother deserved? To understand that choice, you need to go back to the beginning, to the kitchen table where I learned my place in the family ledger. Growing up, there were two children in our house, but only one who counted. My brother Mark was the sun, and I was the satellite orbiting his light, waiting for a warmth that never reached me. My father Robert was a mid-level accountant who believed in ledgers, balance sheets, and the clear, cold math of value. My mother Evelyn was his interpreter, translating his silences into rules. And the rule was simple: Mark was an investment, I was overhead. Mark was charismatic, the kind of person who could talk his way out of a traffic ticket and make the officer laugh. He played varsity football. He got B-pluses without opening a book. Every report card was framed. Every touchdown was a holiday. I was the quiet one, the reader, the girl with her head in a finance textbook at the dinner table while Mark held court. I wasn't rebellious. I was just computationally inefficient. In my father's eyes, I didn't provide a sufficient return on emotional investment. Here's a small, perfect example. Sophomore year of high school, I qualified for the national finals of a business ethics competition. Same weekend, Mark had a fraternity formal at his college 3 hours away. One guess where my parents drove. I took a Greyhound bus to the competition. I won. When I came home with the trophy, my dad glanced at it over his newspaper. "That's nice, Jenny. Maybe you can sell it." He didn't ask what the case study was about. He never did. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I would build my own worth in numbers so big even he couldn't ignore them. I got a full scholarship to Wharton. The day the letter came, my mother actually hugged me. My father said, "Just don't get any ideas. A degree is a tool, not a ticket." It was the closest thing to pride I'd ever gotten, and it felt like a bone thrown to a dog, but I took it. Mark, meanwhile, flunked out of his state school by the end of his second year. Too much partying, not enough class. My father's response? He called it a strategic reassessment. He paid for Mark to get a real estate license. "He's a people person," Dad said. "He'll kill it." Mark's first commission check, a paltry $2,000, was celebrated with steak. My first six-figure salary as a junior analyst, a nod. "Good, now you can pay your own student loans." The asymmetry was the architecture of our family. Mark's potential was always valued over my actual achievement. His dreams were funded, my hustle was expected. By the time I was 28, I had quietly built a healthcare consultancy from my apartment. I was analyzing the very systems my family never saw. I saw the data on for-profit hospices, how they spent less on patient care, how they maximized revenue per room. It was a grim, lucrative equation. 2 years ago, I sold that consultancy. The number was life-changing, 7 figures. I didn't tell my family. What was the point? They'd either ask for money or resent me for it. Instead, I did something that felt like a secret rebellion. I took a majority stake in Serenity Oaks, a for-profit hospice facility on the outskirts of our city. It was a purely analytical decision at first: strong cash flow, undervalued asset. But it became my secret garden, a place where I had ultimate control, a kingdom no one knew I ruled. I hired a professional management team I never visited. My name wasn't on any public documents. To them, I was just Jay Sterling, a silent partner from a family office. It was my escape hatch from a world that had always made me feel powerless. Then 8 months ago, the diagnosis came. Mom's back pain was stage 4 pancreatic cancer, the kind that moves fast and leaves no room for miracles. The family ecosystem went into crisis mode. Dad, the accountant, took over the finances. Mark, the people person, was put in charge of morale, and I was assigned logistics, making doctor's appointments, sorting pills, the silent, thankless work of caregiving. I saw the medical bills piling up on Dad's desk. I saw the fear in his eyes, not just for his wife, but for his ledger. Their savings were being devoured. This is where I need you to understand the calculus. For-profit hospices like Serenity Oaks have tiered pricing. A private suite with dedicated nursing, music therapy, unlimited family visits, it costs about $950 a day. A shared room with minimal extra care runs about $400. The difference is $550 a day. For a patient with weeks left, that's a lot of money. I told my father in one of our few direct conversations that I would cover the cost of the private suite. "Anything?" He looked at me with pure disdain. "We don't take charity, Jennifer, especially not from you." The subtext was clear. My money was tainted because it was mine, not his, not Mark's. My offer was an insult to his ability to provide. So he provided. He moved Mom into Serenity Oaks. He put her in a private suite. For the first 2 weeks, it was fine. Then last Tuesday, I got the automated portfolio alert. A change order had been approved for patient Evelyn Carter, room downgrade from private suite to standard shared, effective immediately. Reason cited: family request. I stared at the email, a cold clinical notification about my mother's dying days. I called the facility manager, my employee, keeping my voice neutral. I asked if there was a problem with the room. "No, Ms. Sterling," he said. "The family requested the change." The son Mark, he came in and signed the forms, said they needed to free up cash for a family emergency. A family emergency? I hung up and opened Instagram. There was Mark in a new post 20 minutes old, a video from a Vegas pool deck, champagne bottle in hand, laughing. The caption, "Sometimes you just gotta answer the call, baby, emergency weekend with the boys." The timestamp was yesterday, the room downgrade was today. The math was finally horrifyingly clear. My brother's emergency weekend was being financed at $550 a day, paid for with my mother's comfort, her dignity, her peace, and my father had authorized it. They had no idea the money was flowing into an account I controlled. They were literally paying me to make my mother's death less comfortable. I drove to Serenity Oaks that night. I stood in the blurred hallway outside the shared room, listening to the sounds of another family's grief through the wall. I held the clipboard with the change order, my hand steady, my heart a block of ice. I was the majority owner. I could countermand the order with a stroke of a pen. I could expose them all. But then I looked through the glass pane in the door. My mother was asleep. Her face was turned toward the empty chair where my father should have been. In that moment, I didn't see the investor or the wronged daughter. I saw the only person who had ever shown me flickers of love, however faint, dying in a room chosen for her by people who valued a Vegas weekend more than her final comfort. And I realized this wasn't just a financial betrayal. This was the final, brutal expression of a lifetime of favoritism. They were optimizing her death for cash flow, and I held all the variables. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my home office and pulled every file, every report, every financial transfer related to Serenity Oaks and my family. And by sunrise, I had mapped the entire betrayal, transaction by transaction. The downgrade had been processed at 9:45 a.m. on Monday. Mark had signed the forms at 9. The wire transfer of the freed-up funds, a $5,000 advance against the cost difference, was initiated by my father at 11:17 a.m. It landed in Mark's account by 3 p.m. By 5 p.m., Mark was on a flight to McCarran International. The timeline was a perfect, sickening symphony of disregard. But here's what I didn't know yet. This wasn't a one-time withdrawal, it was a line of credit. My father had pre-authorized a series of downgrades, each one unlocking more cash based on a sliding scale of my mother's declining needs. As she needed less, they would take more. The facility manager had the schedule: week 1, private suite; week 2, shared room; week 3, if she lasted that long, transfer to the basic ward where the patient-to-nurse ratio doubled. Each step down saved them money. Each step down paid for another one of Mark's emergencies. I called the manager back, this time using my authority as J. Sterling. I asked for the full patient file for Evelyn Carter, including all family correspondence and financial authorizations. He emailed it within the hour. I printed it out. The paper felt toxic in my hands. There was my father's signature, tight and angular, on every cost-cutting form. There was a note in the margin of one in his handwriting: apply surplus to account MC Mark Carter, my brother. They had created a surplus account in his name, funded by my mother's suffering. The clinical notes were worse. My mother had asked for her own room back 2 days after the move. She was disoriented by the noise, distressed by the stranger coughing through the night in the bed next to hers. The nurse's note read: patient expressed anxiety, room change, family notified, family declined upgrade, cited financial constraints. While my brother was betting $500 a hand at a blackjack table. I needed to see it for myself, not as the owner, but as the daughter. I went back to Serenity Oaks the next afternoon. I didn't announce myself, I just walked in wearing simple clothes, looking like any other grieving visitor. The difference between the private wing and the shared ward was stark, and it had nothing to do with daycare. It was about density, it was about sound. It was about the smell of antiseptic trying and failing to cover the scent of decay. The private suites had space for a family to gather, to grieve, to say goodbye in something resembling peace. The shared room was a holding cell. I stood outside her door again. This time my father was inside. I could hear his voice, low and steady. For a wild second, I thought maybe he was apologizing, maybe he was telling her it would be okay. I leaned closer. He was reading the stock market report aloud. Dow Jones is up 173 points, Evelyn, tech sector's rallying. He was talking to her about portfolio performance as she lay dying in a discounted room. The absurdity was a physical pain. He was managing her death like a failing subsidiary. I left before I was seen. I got in my car and screamed until my throat was raw. Then I did what I always do. I analyzed. I ran the numbers for Serenity Oaks as a whole, and that's when I found the second layer of the hellscape. Remember that research about for-profit hospices? It was all true here. My facility, the one I owned, was spending only 62 cents of every dollar on direct patient care. The rest went to administrative costs, investor returns, my returns, and marketing. We were outperforming the for-profit average, but barely. The private suites, they lost money. They were a loss leader to get families in the door. The shared rooms and basic wards were where the profit margin lived. My father, in his ruthless cost-cutting, was moving my mother into the facility's profit center. Her misery was quite literally good for business. My business. The ethical vertigo was complete. I was profiting from my own mother's downgraded care. My silent rebellion had built the very system that was now punishing her. I owned the cage. I had to talk to someone. I called my lawyer, David. I told him everything, my voice shaking with a fury I didn't know I could contain. He listened in that calm, terrifying way lawyers do. When I finished, he was silent for a full 10 seconds. Jennifer, he finally said, you have a fiduciary duty to your other investors. You can't just give away services, but you also have signing authority as the majority owner. You could issue a discretionary credit for compassionate care. What? I asked. A retroactive discount to zero. You could effectively comp her the private suite, reinstate it, and eat the cost as a charitable write-off. The board would need to be notified, but given your stake, they'd likely approve. It would be cleaner than revering the family's decision directly. Cleaner, I repeated. It felt so clinical. It wouldn't change what they did. It would just undo it quietly, leaving their betrayal intact and unconfronted. Or, David said, his tone shifting, there's the nuclear option. You have evidence of financial elder abuse. The siphoning of funds specifically allocated for a vulnerable adult's care to pay for a third party's personal leisure. That's a felony in this state. You could report it. It would blow your family apart. I felt the world tilt. Go to the authorities, send my father and brother to jail while my mother died. The revenge fantasy was a dark, shimmering thing. It would be the ultimate power move. The overlooked daughter becomes the prosecutor, but it would also destroy my mother. Her final days would be a media circus, a scandal. She would die knowing her husband and son were criminals. Was that peace? I told David I needed to think. I hung up and scrolled back to Mark's Instagram. The Vegas trip was over. There were new posts. He was back home at a fancy steakhouse. Back to reality. Thanks for the recharge, boys. Blessed family first. The hashtag felt like a bullet. I did something then that I'm not proud of. I hired a discreet investigator. I needed to know if this was a pattern or just a one-time moral catastrophe. The report came back 72 hours later. Mark's real estate career was a sham. He was massively in debt. My father had been bailing him out for years, quietly draining their retirement accounts. My mother's illness was the final straw. The hospice money wasn't for Vegas. It was to cover Mark's overdue mortgage payment. Vegas was just his reward for convincing Dad to tap this new, grim source of funds. My father wasn't just favoring Mark. He was financially hostage to him, and my mother's comfort was the currency. Armed with this, I decided to confront my father. Not with lawyers, not with threats, just with the truth. I went to their house. He was in his study, surrounded by his ledgers. He looked up annoyed. Jennifer, I don't have time. I'm reconciling the hospice payments. That's why I'm here, Dad. The payments, we need to talk about the room. His face closed like a vault. It's handled. It's what we can afford. Your mother understands. Does she? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Does she understand that the $5,000 you took out of her care this week went to cover Mark's second mortgage? The one he defaulted on because he blew his commission on a sports car. The color drained from his face. How dare you? You have no idea what you're talking about. You've always been jealous of Mark. You're trying to cause trouble when your mother is. When my mother is what? Dying? Yes, and you're making it worse. I threw the investigator's summary on his desk. Not the full report, just enough. Bank transfers, loan documents, dates. It's all there. You're not saving money, Dad. You're funneling it, and you're doing it through her pain. He didn't pick up the papers. He stared at them as if they were radioactive. For the first time in my life, I saw something other than cold certainty in his eyes. I saw shame, and then instantly I saw him bury it under anger. Get out, he whispered. You scheming, vindictive little, you bought this information. You spied on your own family. I uncovered the truth, I said. There's a difference. Reinstate Mom's private suite today or I will. His laugh was a hollow bark. You will with what? Your fantasy money, your little jobs, you have no authority there. And there it was, the cliff edge. I could step back or I could jump. I looked at this man who had quantified my worth my entire life. I thought of my mother's face, turned to the empty chair. I made my choice. I have every authority, Dad. I reached into my bag and pulled out a different set of papers. The ownership statement for Serenity Oaks Holdings, LLC, my name listed as the managing member with 51% voting control. I placed it on top of the investigator's report. I own it. I've owned it for 2 years. You've been paying me to put your wife in a shared room. The silence that followed was the most profound sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of his entire worldview, his ledger, his hierarchy, his understanding of power shattering into dust. He looked from the document to my face, back to the document. His mouth opened. No sound came out. His hands, usually so steady, began to tremble. He wasn't looking at his daughter anymore. He was looking at Jay Sterling. He was looking at his creditor. He was looking at the judge. And in that moment, I held all the power I had ever wanted. It tasted like ashes. He didn't speak for a full minute. He just stared at the ownership document, his breathing shallow. Then he did something I never expected. He didn't yell, he didn't deny it. He asked a question in a voice stripped of all its authority. What are you going to do to us? It was the us that broke the last of my childhood illusions. He and Mark were us. I was the external threat, the prosecutor. I looked at this broken man behind his desk and felt nothing but a vast, cold emptiness. This isn't about doing something asterisk to asterisk you, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. It's about what I'm going to do asterisk for asterisk mom. Her private suite is being reinstated. Tonight, you will go there and you will tell her it was a mistake. That the room became available. You will not mention me. You will not mention money. You will sit with her and you will be her husband, not her accountant. He nodded, a mechanical jerk of his head. He was in shock. The ledger had finally produced a sum he couldn't argue with. And Mark? He whispered. Mark is your problem, but if one more dollar meant for her care goes to him, I will file a report with Adult Protective Services so fast it will make your head spin. This is the only warning you get. I left him there surrounded by the evidence of his own failure. I got in my car, but I didn't drive away. I sat and watched the house, my hands gripping the wheel. I expected him to call Mark to rally the troops to spin this new horror into a story where I was the villain. But 10 minutes later, he walked out, got in his own car, and drove toward Serenity Oaks. He was following instructions. The power shift was absolute, and it felt horrifying. I called the facility manager. Reinstate Evelyn Carter to her original private suite, effective immediately. Cancel all future downgrade authorizations. Comp the entire stay to a zero balance. Code it as a discretionary compassionate care credit. Email the confirmation to me. Yes, Ms. Sterling, right away. It was done. With a 3-sentence phone call, I had undone their betrayal. But as I drove home, the hollow feeling grew. I had won a battle using a weapon I'd kept secret for years. I had become the kind of person who holds power in reserve and uses it to crush opposition. Was I any better than they were? I avoided the hospice for 2 days. I let the new reality settle. I monitored the facility's internal logs. My mother was back in the quiet, sunlit room. Nurse check-ins increased. The notes said her anxiety had decreased. She was sleeping more. Good. That was all that mattered. Then on the 3rd day, my brother showed up at my apartment. He pounded on the door just after 8 p.m. I saw him through the peephole, his face flushed with a toxic mix of rage and panic. I considered not answering, but I was done hiding. I opened the door. He didn't wait for an invitation. He shoved past me. What the hell did you do to Dad? He demanded, spinning to face me. He's a zombie. He won't talk. He just keeps saying she owns it over and over. He won't give me any more money. My mortgage is due. There it was, the core of the crisis. Not remorse, not concern for our mother. His liquidity had dried up. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Good. Good, he spat the word. You selfish bitch. You've been sitting on a gold mine this whole time, watching us struggle, and now you're flexing on us while Mom is dying? What is wrong with you? The projection was breathtaking. Let me get this straight, I said, my voice dangerously calm. You're angry at asterisk me because asterisk I won't let asterisk you use our dying mother's hospice fund to pay your bills? Do you hear yourself? It's just money, it's a fucking room, she doesn't know the difference. That was it, the final, ugly truth of his character. I walked toward him slowly. She knew the difference, Mark. She asked for her room back. The nurse wrote it down. Dad said no because you needed a vacation. For the first time, a flicker of something like shame crossed his face, but it was quickly consumed by defensiveness. Dad made the call. I presented the option. It's called financial planning. It's called financial abuse, and it's a felony. I let that hang in the air. The only reason you're not talking to a detective right now is because I don't want Mom to see you in handcuffs, but understand this, your free ride is over. The bank of Mom is closed, permanently. He stared at me, his chest heaving. I saw the calculations happening behind his eyes, the same ones I'd seen our whole lives. How to manipulate, how to win. But for the first time, he was looking at an opponent he couldn't charm, bully, or outrun. The old tools were useless. You think you're so smart, he finally hissed. You think you've won, but you're alone. You've always been alone. And when Mom's gone, you'll be completely alone. We're still family. We'll still have each other. You'll have your money and your empty house. He meant it to wound, and it did, but it also crystallized my resolve. Get out, Mark. He left, slamming the door so hard the frame shook. I slid down to the floor, the adrenaline draining away, leaving me trembling. He was right about one thing. I was alone. I had chosen this isolation the moment I bought Serenity Oaks in secret. I had built a fortress instead of a bridge. The next morning, I went to see my mother. I hadn't visited since the downgrade. I brought her favorite lilies. I stood outside her new old room, gathering courage. When I walked in, she was propped up, looking out the window. The private suite was serene, quiet. She turned and saw me. A slow, genuine smile spread across her frail face. Jennifer, you came. Of course, Mom. I put the flowers in a vase, my hands unsteady. They moved me back, she said, her voice thin but clear. Your father said there was a mix-up, that this room was always mine. She paused, looking at me with an unsettling clarity. But it was you, wasn't it? I froze. What do you mean? You have that look, the I fixed it look. You've had it since you were a little girl, fixing your own broken toys. She reached out a trembling hand. I took it. Her skin was papery cool, thank you. Tears I didn't know I had left welled up in my eyes. You're welcome, Mom. Don't be angry with them, she whispered, her gaze drifting back to the window. Your father, he's so scared, and Mark, he never learned how to stand on his own. I failed him that way. She looked back at me, her eyes glistening. I failed you too. I was so busy keeping the peace, I let you become a stranger, the strongest one of us all, and we made you a stranger. It was the first true, unmediated acknowledgement I had ever received from her. It was an apology and an elegy all in one. I cried then, silently holding her hand. We sat like that for a long time. No ledgers, no transactions, just a mother and a daughter too late. When I left, I felt both lighter and heavier. The need for revenge had evaporated. It had been replaced by a profound, aching sadness. But the story wasn't over. Because while I was having that moment with my mother, my father was taking action of his own. He went to see his lawyer. I found out 2 days later. David called me, his voice tense. Jennifer, your father's attorney just contacted me. They're preparing a petition. For what? I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. To have your mother declared incapacitated and to have your father appointed as sole guardian of her estate. They're alleging financial exploitation by a third party with undue influence. That's you. They're claiming your secret ownership of the facility constitutes a conflict of interest and that your interference with her care plan is motivated by financial gain. The world went sideways. He was flipping the script. He was going to paint asterisk me as the abuser. My compassionate act, comping her room, could be framed as me manipulating the facility's finances for unclear purposes. My secret ownership was the ultimate weapon against me. They're claiming, David continued, that by comping the room, you've created a liability for the hospice that could impact other investors, which is a breach of your fiduciary duty. They're saying you're an unstable element, using your power to play out a family drama with the facility's assets. It was genius, it was ruthless. It was the only move left in my father's playbook. When you can't win on the facts, change the narrative. He was fighting for control of the only thing he had left, the story, and he was using the law to do it. What's the risk? I asked, my voice hollow. If a judge grants the guardianship, your father would have the legal authority to make all her healthcare and financial decisions. He could move her to another facility immediately. He could also, as guardian, potentially sue you and the hospice for mismanagement. It would be a long, ugly public fight, and it would happen while your mother is dying. He had backed me into a corner. If I fought him, I devastated my mother's final days with a public legal war. If I capitulated, he regained total control, and I would have to watch from the sidelines as he potentially resumed funding Mark through her care. My power was suddenly a vulnerability. I had a choice: escalate to a nuclear legal battle or find another way. I thought of my mother's hand in mine. I thought of her saying, "Don't be angry with them." She wanted peace, but peace wasn't surrender, it was strategy. I need to see the facility's full books, I told David. Not just the operational reports, the investor distributions, the profit allocations for the last quarter, everything. Jennifer, why? That's not going to help with a guardianship petition. Just get me the data, I said. I have a different kind of ledger to balance. The numbers told the real story. While I was focused on my family's personal betrayal, the larger betrayal of the for-profit hospice model was playing out in black and white. The facility was on track to post a 22% profit margin this quarter, largely due to efficiency adjustments in staffing and supplies. The basic ward, where my mother had been, had the highest margin of all. The investors, including me, were making more money because the care was less expensive to deliver. My father's cost-cutting had aligned perfectly with the facility's profit motive. We were, in a grotesque way, business partners. And that gave me my leverage, not over my father, but over the entire situation. I called an emergency virtual board meeting. My 5 fellow investors, all silent money men from out of state, appeared in little boxes on my screen. I didn't waste time. I'm facing a potential lawsuit and a publicity nightmare that could crater the value of your investment, I told them. I laid it out, sparing no detail about the family conflict, the downgrade, the guardianship petition. The narrative will be greedy for-profit hospice owned by family member exploits dying mother. The media will feast on it, our licensing could be reviewed, our referrals will dry up. The board was silent, then erupted into anxious chatter. I let them panic for a minute, then I said, I have a solution, but it requires a unanimous vote and a capital commitment. What solution? The lead investor, a man named Reynolds, asked. We turn Serenity Oaks into a nonprofit hybrid model. We create an endowed fund, starting with a $2 million capital injection from our own profits to guarantee private suites for any patient whose family is facing financial hardship. We publicly announce it as a new standard of care. We get ahead of the story. We make the narrative about redemption and ethical reform, not greed and family drama. That's a massive hit to profitability, another investor argued. It's an investment in sustainability, I countered. The data is clear. Nonprofit hospices have better outcomes, fewer complaints, and longer-term community trust. We're currently a target. This makes us a leader. It neutralizes the lawsuit before it starts because my father's petition hinges on portraying the facility as exploitative. We change what the facility is asterisk. I could see them thinking, calculating. Reynolds spoke again, and you would lead this transformation. I would, I said, and I would personally match the $2 million endowment, but I need your vote today. They took an hour to deliberate. I sat in my silent apartment staring at the screen. This was the real gamble, not for control of my mother's room, but for the soul of the place that held her. It was also my penance. The vote came back 4-1 in favor. The no wanted to sell his stake immediately. I agreed to buy him out. The transformation was a go. I called David, draw up the paperwork to establish the nonprofit endowment fund, contact the State Hospice Association. We're going to announce a new compassionate care initiative. Then I called my father's lawyer. I requested a meeting, not between lawyers, between my father and me at the hospice. The stage was set for the final confrontation, but this time I wasn't bringing a hidden ownership document. I was bringing a new reality, one where the ledger finally included a column for mercy. We met in the hospice's small, sterile conference room. My father sat across from me, his lawyer beside him, a stack of guardianship papers between us like a fortification. He expected a war. I slid a different document across the table. This is what's happening instead. It was the board resolution to establish the Serenity Oaks Compassionate Care Endowment and the press release announcing the facility's transition to a nonprofit hybrid model. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, picked it up first. She scanned it, her eyebrows rising. She passed it to my father. He read it slowly. I watched his face. Confusion first, then disbelief, then a dawning, horrified comprehension. He understood the math immediately, the $2 million capital injection, the guarantee of private suites for financially strained families, the complete neutralization of his legal argument. You can't claim a facility is exploitative when it's publicly giving away its most expensive service. You're giving away the profit, he finally said, his voice barely audible. I'm reinvesting it, I corrected, into the patients, starting with mom but not ending with her. I looked at his lawyer. The petition alleges a conflict of interest and financial exploitation. This endowment eliminates the conflict. I've removed myself from all profit distributions. The narrative you were planning to use is now obsolete. If you proceed, you'll be suing a newly established charitable fund, and the story will be about a family trying to stop their daughter from giving away millions to help the dying. I don't think that's the headline you want. The lawyer leaned back, a faint professional smile on her lips. She was already calculating the liability. She turned to my father. Robert, she's right. This changes the calculus significantly. My father wasn't looking at his lawyer. He was staring at me. Why? He asked, not a challenge, a genuine, bewildered question. Why would you do this after everything? Because it was never about beating you, Dad, I said, my throat tight. It was about stopping you, and then it was about fixing what I owned. I built a cage too. This is me cutting the lock off. The guardianship petition was withdrawn the next day. No lawsuit was filed. The public announcement of the endowment made local news. The headline read, Local Hospice Heiress Funds Dignity for Dying. They dug up my identity. Jay Sterling was now Jennifer Carter. There was no scandal, only a puzzling act of philanthropy. My mother lived for another 11 days. They were quiet days. My father visited every morning and evening. He didn't bring his ledger. He brought a book of poetry she loved and he read to her. He held her hand. He was present in a way I had never seen. The threat of loss, the stripping away of his financial control, had finally forced him to show up as a husband, not a manager. Mark came twice. He was subdued, awkward. He didn't ask for money. He just sat there struggling to make small talk with a woman who could no longer follow it. I think he finally saw her as a person, not a resource. It was a painful, necessary education. I spent my afternoons with her. We didn't talk much. We listened to music. We looked at old photo albums. She would point to a picture of me at 10, holding a science fair ribbon and say, "You were always so determined." It was an epitaph for the childhood I never got to have, but it was also a blessing. She passed away on a Tuesday morning just as the sun was coming up. It was peaceful. She was in her private suite, surrounded by soft light. My father and I were both there. We didn't speak. We just each held one of her hands until there was no pulse left to feel. The funeral was small. Distant relatives who'd seen the news article came, expecting some kind of drama, I think. There was none, just grief. My father gave the eulogy. He didn't talk about her as a wife or a mother. He talked about her as Evelyn, a woman who loved lilies and bad poetry and had a laugh that sounded like bells. He cried in front of everyone. I had never seen that before. After the service, he found me near the back of the gathering. He looked older, diminished, but his eyes were clear. The endowment, he said, the 2 million, your share, that came from the sale of your consultancy. Oh yes. You didn't use any of the facility's profits, the money we paid. No, that money is part of the operating fund. My contribution was separate, clean. He nodded, swallowing hard. I would like to contribute, he said, to the endowment in her name. I've liquidated some assets. He meant he'd sold the lake house, the one he'd always said would be Mark's someday. It's not 2 million, it's 250,000, but it's something. It was an apology in the only language he truly understood. A financial atonement. I accepted it. Thank you, Dad, she would have liked that. He then said something that will stay with me forever. I read the research you cited about for-profit hospices spending less on care. I thought they were just more efficient. I didn't let myself understand that efficiency had a human cost. I applied that logic to your mother. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. I am so sorry, Jennifer. It wasn't enough, it would never be enough, but it was a start, a real one. As for Mark, the financial pipeline was permanently closed. My father, under the guidance of a financial advisor he'd finally hired, structured a modest conditional trust for him. It covered basic living expenses and retraining programs, no lump sums, no bailouts. Mark had to get a job, a real one. Last I heard, he's selling cars. He's not happy, but he's solvent. We don't talk, some bridges stay burned, you just build new roads around the chasm. The transformation of Serenity Oaks is ongoing. We've increased the direct patient care budget by 35%. We hired more nurses. The profit margin is gone, replaced by a sustainability metric. We're not rich, but we're solvent. And the endowment has already helped 7 families keep their loved ones in private suites, giving them the peace my mother almost lost. Here's the final, surprising detail. 2 months after my mother died, I received a letter from the State Hospice Association. They'd been monitoring our transition. They asked me to speak on a panel about ethical ownership and hybrid care models. The other speaker was a woman who ran a nonprofit hospice that had been struggling to compete with the for-profits. Her name was Sarah. During the panel, she told a story about her best friend in college, a woman who helped her through cancer when she had no family. She said that friend taught her that care isn't a transaction. After the panel, I went up to her. Your friend, I said. What was her name? Sarah Mitchell, she said, smiling sadly. She died years ago, but she's why I do this. I didn't tell her that the story she'd just told mirrored one I'd once heard in a different context, about a medical student and a dying friend. The world is smaller and stranger than we think. Sometimes the patterns of care and betrayal echo in ways that bring strangers together to fix broken systems. I sold my majority stake in Serenity Oaks last month. I sold it to the nonprofit foundation we created at a massive loss. I am no longer the owner, I'm just a board member. The power I clung to for security, for secret revenge, I've given away. And in giving it away, I finally feel like I have control, not over people, but over my own choices. My father and I have dinner every other Sunday. It's stiff, it's awkward. We talk about business, the news, safe topics. But sometimes he asks about my work, and sometimes I ask about his gardening. It's a new language we're learning, word by painful word. The ledger of my childhood will always show a deficit. Some losses are permanent, but I'm no longer trying to balance it. I've opened a new book, one where the columns are labeled differently: peace, dignity, and the fragile, hard-won possibility of grace. This is where the story turns from confrontation to construction, from what was taken to what can be built. So what does this story mean? It's not a fairy tale. No one was redeemed by a grand gesture. Systems are just collections of choices, and families are the most intimate system we'll ever know. My father chose the ledger, my brother chose the easy exit, I chose the secret fortress, and my mother in the end had no choices left. That's the brutal math. But math can be rewritten. The research shows 40% of families operate with a favorite. It shows for-profit hospices spend less on care. These aren't abstract statistics. They are the blueprints for quiet tragedies happening in plain sight. My family became a case study in both. The question this leaves you with isn't about what I did, it's about the systems you're part of, seen and unseen. What ledgers are you trusting? What hidden power do you hold, or what power are you ignoring? If you see yourself in this story, whether you're the one being discounted, the one playing favorite, or the one silently enabling a broken dynamic, I want you to hear this. The most powerful move isn't always confrontation. Sometimes it's reconstruction. It's looking at the machine you're in, whether it's a family or a business, and asking not just who's to blame, but how do I change the gears? I didn't get my childhood back. I didn't get a dramatic apology that erased decades. What I got was something harder and more real, the responsibility to build something better from the wreckage, and that is a form of justice. It's slow, it's unglamorous. It happens in boardrooms and quiet hospice halls and awkward Sunday dinners, but it's real. Your family might not be fighting over a hospice bed. It might be an inheritance, a business, a parent's time, or simply the weight of expectations. The currency of favoritism isn't always cash. It's attention, validation, belief. And the audit of that ledger leaves scars on everyone, even the golden child, because they're taught to measure their worth in a currency that eventually devalues everyone. Before you go, I want to ask you one thing. Look at your own life. Is there a system, a family pattern, a workplace dynamic, a silent agreement where you're accepting a discounted version of what you deserve, or where you're discounting someone else? Name it just to yourself. That's the first step off the ledger. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about value and dignity and the quiet architecture of power, let me know in the comments. Tell me, what would you have done differently? And if you want more stories that dig into the hidden systems of our lives, please subscribe. I'll be here sharing the messy, complicated math of being human. Thank you for listening. Thank you for bearing witness. Now go and audit your own ledgers with kindness and with courage. I'll see you next time.